Catanzariti, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. And I will present a work on the more general framework and digital sovereignty, focusing on the case study of the uCloud. I cannot see it very well. It's not the entire slide. Okay, but it's not the entire slide that I prepare. It's just a part of the slide. I don't know why.
It's not the right slide.
Okay, no, this is okay. no, I just put. So the title of this presentation is Data Sharing and Search for Sovereignty, and it's of course a sort of provocative title because. As you know, the project of data sharing and the uCloud, which is the materialization, is the materialization of what is meant to be, at least in the intention, the idea of digital sovereignty is something that is in theory and deserves a bit of attention. So some ideas of the titles and also on my perspective. The title is, of course, as said, provocative in the sense that data sharing and sovereignty are heterogeneous terms, and I try to combine them in a perspective which is, of course, a legal perspective, but as maybe the paper shows, the paper uses the conceptual architecture of social legal theory as a basis to test the feasibility of the new configuration of legal categories as applied to digital transformation. And this means, in my perspective, that different regulatory regimes related to, for example, cyber law, data protection, human rights, competition law, and many sectoral regimes that are affected by the EU data strategy in general, need to be integrated in light of a theoretical analysis of the transformation related to sovereignty. You certainly know that in July 2020, the German government, in its official program, has established the idea of digital sovereignty as the leitmotif of European digital policy. And this ambition has been grounded on 4 pillars. Ensuring the role of the European Union as, first of all, protective power for individuals. This means that European unions acts as global interlocutor in the sense of protecting, maybe better protecting, individual rights towards the globe. Second, standard setter of fundamental values. Of course, you are very aware of all the literature about the Brussels effect and the idea of standard setting, regulatory attitude of European unions towards international interlocutors. Third point, global interlocutor for innovation. So a competitive power that finally can interact with other actors. Last point, maybe the most tricky point, is that the European Union aims to be an open legal space for data sharing. And this, of course, opens a lot of questions and issues that I will comment in a moment. So why now is it so important that the role of EU tries to be new and novel in the sense of being a sort of technological sovereign? So data sharing, of course, is casted into a pathway towards digital sovereignty, as said, or is the means to achieve it. This is the issue. The European cloud aims to offer an overall response to data regulation, and the huge amount of cloud, of course, that is processed all over the world raises the issues of technological capacity and technological independence. This is mostly in the hands of the providers, as all we know establishes in US and China. And being digitally sovereign means for Europe being independent from other countries, as well as from the technological solution imposed by private actors, private sector data. So now Europe is shaping its digital future and is at a crossroad of different choices, which involves the use of the law, the investment in technology, and of course, policy and data governance. And these choices will affect upcoming years and its place as international actors in global relationships. China, for example, has recently approved national security and data protection reforms. So it's the time to be aware of some choices that can compromise the future, or at least affect it tomorrow. Of course, if we talk in terms of digital sovereignty, we immediately face some shortcomings. And these shortcomings derive, in my view and my perspective, in what I have developed in my research, as shortcomings that have to do with the use of the term territory. So Europe doesn't have, probably at the moment, a very awareness of the term territory. First of all, there is a lack of clarity on the word sovereignty, because as we all know, using traditional category of political science and law, sovereignty is one of the elements of the state, together with territory and population. So is a legitimate power exerted on a population located on a territory. So this is a first traditional definition that is completely questioned by the idea of technological sovereignty as considered as independence, technological independence. Low control of digital infrastructure. This is the empirical datum that is, of course, one of the tricky points under the eyes, because at the moment, Europe does not have the control of digital infrastructure. And this is the aim of the construction of the European cloud. Democratic legitimacy is another tricky point, because if we talk in terms of digital sovereignty, are we sure that we have a mandate for digital sovereignty? There is also an interplay, a very difficult interplay with all the ideas on cyber sovereignty. As we know, international law is specifically applied or applicable in the context of cyberspace, but the idea of state sovereignty is very controversial and is not say that can be considered as a standalone primary rule. There is some scholarship that contends, of course, this kind of state of art. Last but not least, sovereignty or something else. So are we sure that we really need a term, a so heavy term as digital sovereignty, or are we referring to something else, such as, for example, property of data, controllership, autonomy, economic independence? So these are the shortcomings and the issues on the table. How to ensure that the European values are protected in this project, alias what could be the added value of the European Union in fostering a project based on digital sovereignty, where the construction of European cloud is the core issue of this project. Ursula von der Leyen has referred to tech sovereignty as the capacity of Europe to make its own choice based on its values, respecting the rules, its own rules. But who are the actors involved? So we can talk here about an idea of sovereignty which is shared between different actors, so private actors, public, and users. It's really a work in progress idea of sovereignty to which nobody is really used. And the second point that comes immediately as a consequence is, do we need a bottom-up or top-down approach? We are very aware of the fact that in the last 5 years, maybe, we faced so many regulatory initiatives in the field of digital, there is quite complicated to take into account. So Europe does what it can in terms of regulatory power, but sometimes the top-down approach is also important, especially in processes such as the processes that can lead to an idea of sovereignty in the digital framework. Of course, there are two worries. The first worry is linked to the idea that building a European infrastructure can be a way to limit foreign platforms' influence in Europe. The other idea is that data sharing and shared control is a very fascinating word, but it is really important how we can fill in this concept. So according to the idea of the Gaia-X federated data infrastructure, which is the prototype of digital sovereignty in Europe. So it's the German-French initiative related to the European cloud. The data sharing is considered as data space. So again, the idea of territory comes strongly in my view, and data spaces need to be assumed for their potential as a relationship. So this is the intention, as spaces of data sharing without connection with location factors. So they are rather functional spaces where the actors who have access to data define the future of those spaces. And these spaces are then not characterized by territorial connection, rather by the power and capacities of actors who interact within them and based on certain rules. So this is very important. Data sharing implies also the sharing of the rules under which data is shared. And this idea of data space is really the added value of the European Union, as far as we recognize that this artificial is legal, is something that is completely constructed through legal categories and not on a factual basis. This is a very interesting point. Data spaces under this project are at the moment 9 and are characterized through subject matter. So are not related to territorial connection with a space, but are based on subject matter and interests, of course. So industry, Green Deal, health, mobility, finance, energy, agriculture, and public administration. And now we come to the very important part of the argument. So the controllership in the project of digital sovereignty and European cloud is realized through the capacity to store data. But how can we store data and where can we store data? So the idea is basically at the moment to construct a EU cloud based on localization requirements to limit the impact of foreign rules on data and European companies, to foster, at least in the intention, the competitiveness of European companies, also to enhance participation, because we said at the beginning that this idea of sovereignty is a shared sovereignty between users, public and private sector data. So citizenship on the one side and business on the other side, through an idea of composite control. Of course, also fostering cybersecurity, because the security of the system is fundamental. This is a very basic example of how it works. For example, the Gaia-X is not a cloud provider, but it's a not-profit organization that is not competitive directly with the European companies, but offers services to the companies who adhere to the association. So we face exactly two dimensions. We are really stuck in a dimension in-out, in my view, because we have the layer of data governance in which also regulation, for example, the regulation on personal data provides the ban for localization on personal data in member states. But we have also many limits to data transfer, and the example of GDPR is one of the most peculiar example. And finally, in many sectors, the strict compliance with European standards to enter the EU markets. All the pieces of the European data strategy are conceived in this way. If you want, if you look at the scope of application of this piece of regulation, you can easily realize that if you want to enter the European markets, you have to be subject to the European law. That's the basic point. This is the layer of data governance. Of course, this is the worry layer, which involves the non-European platform that offer infrastructure. So the question is, are our legal standards competitive with infrastructure that the platform offer? And regulation must go hand in hand with investments and industries and infrastructure. So it's not one without the other. So the risks in this very complicated landscape are basically three. The first is that technology can be not left alone because it only takes into account the output of its internal performance. So if we look at the technology aims, it's clear that the output of the technological performance is internal and considered internally in the technological performance and not externally by another social system. The second risk is that we need to look at the impact of regulatory choices in the context of international relations and also at forms of retaliation by global actors who, of course, interact with some strategies that have been undertaken by other interlocutors. Third point, as lawyer, I feel to say this, the law is not a make-up operation, in my view. And this, for me, is quite true because if we look at the two basic trajectories that have represented the way through which the Europe and not only the Europe, but also China and US have dealt with digital transformation, we basically face two ways: extraterritoriality and data nationalism. So my question is there an exit strategy between the two? I go a bit in detail because otherwise it can seem a bit exotic, I would say. So extraterritoriality is, for example, the enlargement of territorial scope of application, the strengthening of requirements for data transfer to third countries. If you look at Schrems 1 and 2, you can, of course, provide example, or a defensive approach to standard setting against extraterritorial interference. Google Spain is one example, for example, no? Whereas data nationalism is the capacity to attract data to the territory of nation state. For example, by requiring companies to store, process, or copy data exclusively on servers located within the national border. So is there an exit strategies? Just to give you an overview of what is an idea of technological territory, which is more modeled on the second idea that I try to describe, so the data nationalism. This is a map of technological territories. The red are those who that are heavily regulated. The light pink are really pending and not sure about the regulatory option. But just to give you an idea that the borders are really digital borders. and it's not like a way of saying. So now we face the promise of digital spaces that are not digital borders. And the creation of a data infrastructure based on European cloud is per se an outcome. So we cannot think that a data infrastructure is only a piece of regulation without a place, a physical place where it's possible to create an outcome. Digital infrastructure is an outcome itself. It's a technical, a legal, and social outcome in this sense. So we should be aware that the risk for Europe is facing this this opposite dichotomy, data localization for a borderless Europe. And this is, of course, I don't have time to go in detail through the piece of legislation, but this statement is exactly reported, and we have evidence of it in each piece of legislation that you see there. Now, of course, it's not longer Data Act, but it's Regulation 868, 2022. Why a European cloud? First of all, we have time? 5 minutes, I think. Okay. Okay, cloud computing is the opportunity, in my view, to exit the dichotomy between extraterritoriality and digital nationalism. What I propose is to apply functional criteria to the European cloud. They make the control over data possible through interoperable technical and legal standards. They are not strictly related to the localization requirement. This implies that when applicable, territorial connection with data centers only act as a functional leverage of uniformity with certain values, as well as market access with equal opportunities. Just to give you an idea, of course, when we talk of European clouds, we refer to a model enabling on-demand, continuous and cost-effective access to a shared pool of resources that can be, of course, rapidly accessed and also provided. Cloud computing is based on data mirroring, and what is important is in the project of European cloud infrastructure, there is a combination between edge computing and cloud computing. So this is an ambitious goal in my view. This is based on the idea that data sharing happens between trusted partners who use the same standards to process and share data. And the interest in data sharing can be, this is the optimistic view, and this is my view, can be maybe a legal basis for jurisdiction. What I mean with this, I try to focus on the phenomena also in light of a bit global overview. So we had to face the Brussels effect towards the Beijing effect, what has been called Beijing effect. So European data strategies offers piece of regulation without having still an infrastructure, while other actors offer satellites and fiber optic cables to be competitive. Of course, we offer interoperability of data and interoperability of technical standards, but other actors offer interoperability of digital ecosystems. And it's a way of making regulatory choices, and also it's a culture, at the end of the day, it's a cultural issue. So GDPR is constructed on the idea of standard setting, while China, in its recent piece of legislation, is developing an idea of global and telecommunication services which are exported globally, whereas US adopts a kind of traditional approach based on standards of international trade. So the basic alternative is data spaces intended as clusters, not related to location requirement, vis-a-vis virtual borders. Conclusions, where does Europe go? I draw very limited conclusion on a topic that is really complicated, but I would very love to have your views and feedbacks on this, because I developed some ideas on this. First of all, talking about digital sovereignty in Europe is completely different from doing it in China or US on other systems. So digital sovereignty maybe is not a comparable notion, and we should be aware of what we are talking about when we talk in terms of digital sovereignty. Second, the mimetic competition among digital sovereignities cannot ensure equality between states as we are accustomed as international lawyers maybe, because it depends on the leverage of their capacity to control infrastructure. So digital sovereignty cannot ensure equality between states as legal sovereignty, which is the bastion of international law. So we should be a bit aware of the terms that are used. Finally, and this is the operational part, the operational conclusion, data localization without investment or infrastructure is a luxury and counterproductive. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but this is what I feel sharing with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's up to me to make a few comments. I think your paper really raises a very crucial question. You know, the link between data and territory, or as you then say, extraterritoriality and data nationalism, this tension. But the paper is a little bit like your speech. You know, you discuss all this. Sometimes it's a little bit repetitious. The same things come. So I think you should structure it a little bit more. But you know, it's a preliminary discussion on a really crucial topic, and as you show, nobody really has a clear idea. You know, and so let me try to structure it a little bit. So I think it would be good. It's a discussion that is not historical. So maybe it would be good to just start with, I don't look back the past 10 years, you know, the different topics that have come up. I remember at some point we talked about Huawei that is siphoning off European data because on my cell phone it's Huawei. Okay, yeah, I mean at some point that was a concern, you know. Then yes, the Cloud Act, but there is also the Chip Act. Yeah, we should produce our chips because Taiwan has, I don't know, 90% of the global chip. So there are many, maybe I cannot do it, but it's just my thing is also anecdotal. But you know, if you look back to the big topics of the past 10 to 15 years, how has that come to be? How were we increasingly worried? And there are other things, I mean, more subtle. The Californian company siphoning off the profits and Juan and I have done a paper on it, not reinvesting their profits into the European infrastructure, but so I think that could maybe help to give some and see some clarity, or maybe we just see that it's all over the place and we're even more confused after that. Then I think as a second more, you have it in the paper, but more clear distinction. There is clearly an infrastructure piece. The servers, the sensors, the telecom infrastructure that transmits, you know, and somehow this idea that we should control, that should be under European control, somewhere in a European state, okay? How far we can go and all that with, and you even say in light of satellites and you know, but okay. And then opposite to that, data, which yeah, at some point they are collected by sensors, they're transported by telecom infrastructures, they're stored somewhere. But it's more, as we discussed before, it's more than just the data. So and that's what you're trying to, that's why I like the paper. I'm critical, but I like the paper. It's really, I think it's an essential discussion, you know, about then what does sovereignty mean for data? And that's your question. And you come up with, maybe we should have other criteria. I'm a little bit still curious, even you have a slide, you know, functional criteria and things. I don't think it's not clear enough to me yet. And then in your paper, but it's a side issue, in your paper you say this is a program. Often you talk in your paper about a program. So I understand it is a project that you are launching. So maybe, you know, just outline the program. The outcome of your paper is, okay, that's the program. We do this and then, okay, then I have two more points. One is, okay, sovereignty. Maybe talk a little bit more about geopolitics. You have it in there. It's China, it's US, but sovereignty is more. It's also security. There's a military dimension. You don't mention that. I mean, what are the nation states about after all, you know? I mean, it's not just being nice. I mean, basically they make war, okay? So and that's their core business. So what, you know, I mean, touch up on that kind of cyber attacks, and I'm sure when you do the history, you will find that also the Russian, the Ukrainian cyber attacks, the Iranian cyber attacks, all these kind of things will come up. Okay, so maybe that aspect a little bit more explicitly, and finally, the money. Okay, so the EU wants to do this, it costs, but the companies, I have two elements. I have the companies who make profit with data and, you know, okay, that for them it has a cost. If I don't raise this question, Günther will raise the question, you know, where is the profit motive and how will the companies behave on this? And I have another element that is, maybe it's anecdotal, I don't know, but you know, I'm from Switzerland, and what they try to do is, we are the safe haven for data. We have a banking secret that doesn't work anymore, but now we have a data secret. And if you come, and they're legislative proposals, and deposit your data in Switzerland, the American American IRS will not get it, or even the EU will not get it. Is that something, is that serious, or is it, I think is ridiculous, but you know, there may be other countries that are competing in this data sovereignty kind of thing. And maybe you want to discuss this a little bit, because the EU is always Russia, it's always China and US and EU, but maybe you, I don't know, Bahamas is having something really good. Then, so I stop here.
Thank you.